Yeah, and it's playing the Dark Knight Rises mobile game. The Dark Knight Trilogy. What's there to say about this franchise that already hasn't been said before? One of the most widely successful and influential comic book movies of our time. One that re-envisioned the Batman mythos as an ultra-grounded universe devoid of even the slightest whiff of fantastical and supernatural elements. The success of these movies kicked off the era of gritty superhero movies. And while it is impossible to go for a hyper-realistic approach for certain characters like Spider-Man and Superman, it's undeniable that their reboots had a darker approach than their previous on-screen iterations. The Dark Knight Trilogy is a hallmark of the pre-cinematic universe era of comic book movies, and despite them arguably not really feeling like comic book movies, I highly respect Nolan's visions for the Batman, and it is a testament to how versatile of a character the Caped Crusader is. He absolutely works on both ends of the spectrum. Silly, campy, colorful fun times, or ultra-realistic, dark, and scary. But if there's one branch of this franchise that didn't bloom and reach its potential, it's the video games. There was a promising start with the Batman Begins movie tie-in game. A game that, while it doesn't do anything particularly ambitious, it is a solid linear experience that, to this day, still has some of the most striking visuals found on the PS2. I actually have an entire video dedicated to the Batman Begins video game, so check that out if you want to hear more of my thoughts on it. After the massive release of The Dark Knight in the summer of 2008, the expected tie-in video game was mysteriously absent. In the late 2000s, comic book movie tie-in games was still tradition. So, where was the follow-up to Batman Begins? Well, there was a Dark Knight game in the works by Pandemic Studios. It was set to be an open-world stealth action game with a drivable tumbler and Batpod, a natural progression after Batman Begins' more linear affair and dedicated tumbler levels. Sadly, after a troubled development, the game was canned in late 2008. And just recently, footage of another cancelled Batman game set in the Nolanverse by Monolith has surfaced online. But Rocksteady had been working on their own Batman project after being approached by Eidos, who had obtained the rights to make a Batman game in 2007. Batman Arkham Asylum was released in August 2009, and the rest is history. Breaking the seemingly indisputable curse of superhero games being meh to pretty good, and spawning arguably the best superhero game franchise at the time. However, there is a small anomaly among this period of Batman games that I find all so fascinating. Despite a Dark Knight movie tie-in game not ever coming to fruition, not counting any Java flip phone games, there is a Dark Knight Rises game that came out for smartphones in 2012. This is so bizarre to me because by 2012 we were already 2 games deep into the Arkham franchise with surely more on the way. Not only that, but there was also Arkham City Lockdown, which itself was already extending the Arkham franchise to occupy the mobile space. I'll always step up to bat for movie tie-in games, these things are my bread and butter. But this feels so unnecessary, but also like a goldmine for strange, obscure, and goofy stuff to unearth. What does a Dark Knight Rises tie-in game even look like? There's bound to be a ton of Arkham influence, with that franchise being the template for comic book games at the time. Shoot, its influence even went outside the superhero space. Who voices Batman? Christian Bale reprised his role for the Batman Begins game, but I doubt he'd do the same for a measly mobile game. Do they get a guy to do the silly Bane voice? Can we pilot that hideous bat plane thing? Let's not stand on ceremony anymore. Here's the Dark Knight Rises mobile game by Gameloft. To keep the usual spiel brief, this game's been delisted from app stores. I know, it sucks. I'm running it on an emulator with the benefit of using an actual controller, and visuals getting a bit of a boost due to running on more powerful hardware. And while I have you here, I don't usually ask for this, but why not hit that subscribe button, give me a like, and ring the notification bell. I have more videos on obscure and lesser discussed mobile games on the way, so this would be the best way to keep up with those. I also have a YouTube membership you can join for bonus perks like access to videos early, channel emojis, and shoutouts at the end of the video. I'm making a big push for 20,000 subscribers by the end of this year, and it'd be awesome to have your support. Anyway, back to it. Check out this awesome menu screen. It goes through all the visual motifs throughout the trilogy. The well from Batman Begins, the crumbling buildings from The Dark Knight, and the buildings on fire from Rises. This is so cool. I was not expecting this much effort for the menu of a mobile game. This makes me picture a game that covers the entire Dark Knight trilogy. I pitched this same idea for Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy, and I don't know, I think I'm obsessed with this concept. The Matrix Path of Neo was onto something. Our adventure starts right after Bruce Wayne catches Selina Kyle stealing his mother's pearls and dusting for fingerprints in his mansion. It's been 8 years since Bruce has donned the cowl, and suspecting Selina Kyle to have more nefarious schemes than simply stealing some jewelry, this is enough incentive for the Dark Knight to return. Already a slight deviation from the movie, as Bruce didn't make his big re-emergence as Batman until Bane made his attack on the stock exchange. But making Batman track down Catwoman after her burglary is not a bad way to gamify that plot point. First off, I have to say, holy moly does this game look visually impressive, especially this Batman character model. Check out the raindrops sliding down his suit. Those are some striking details. Batman's model gets a little iffy if you look at his face for too long. For the life of me, I can't figure out what's going on with his eyes, but otherwise, this is spectacular. Every detail of this heavily designed Batsuit is accurately captured, and the way light reacts to it generally gives it a home console level of fidelity. As expected, Christian Bale does not reprise his role for this game. What could have been more important than getting in the booth to record some odd hours of VO for The Dark Knight Rises, the mobile game? Honestly, I couldn't even begin to imagine. So we have to settle for an impersonator. This could go very wrong because the signature Bale Bat voice has to be a contender for one of the most parodied and impersonated iconic movie voices of all time. From animated shorts to live action skits, it's kinda low-hanging fruit by now. Had they gotten Christian Bale to do the voice here, we would have taken it as, oh, it's just more of Bale as Batman. But getting some guy to do his take on the voice can easily steer us to college humor Badman territory. But you know what? The guy they hired ain't bad. It's friggin' Goku as Batman, Sean Schemmel. He really just goes for it here. I never once laughed at his performance, which I think is really impressive because anyone doing the Bale Bat voice can easily sound like it's meant to be for laughs. But even the moments where he dials it up to 11 and is barking at some thug trying to intimidate him, I thought were solid performances.
You know where Lucius Fox is being held. You're going to tell me. Go to hell! How long do you think you can hang on? I have a lot of patience.
Taking control of Batman, and right off the bat, the Arkham influence is very apparent. We have a third-person camera that's pushed right up to the Caped Crusader's shoulder, having him take up 50% of the screen for that extra splash of immersion. This is pretty cool. It really gives this game a push that brings it that much closer to at least looking like a console experience. To compare it to the last Gameloft game I covered here, Spider-Man Total Mayhem had a fixed camera angle, which there's nothing wrong with, and honestly is probably the better choice in the long run for a mobile experience, but giving The Dark Knight Rises a proper third-person camera with free-range control is really ambitious. I can't speak to how well it functioned on an actual mobile device, even on an emulator is a bit finicky, but I gotta give Gameloft props for just going for it. To no surprise, we have a combat system also inspired by Rocksteady's own free-flow combat. A handful of games from this time were inspired by this revolutionary combat system, and if there's anyone that's gonna follow suit, well, it's gonna be another game starring the world's greatest detective himself. Unfortunately, it comes off as a pale imitation, failing to capture what made the free-flow combat from the Arkham games so addicting. For me, one of the things that stood out from free-flow combat was how natural Batman looked pummeling his enemies. It was the first combat system that didn't make me feel like I was just playing as a video game character with pre-designated animations programmed to coincide with specific inputs. Even though I was just pressing square, 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 Batman never seemed to repeat the same animation. It was so lifelike and cinematic. That aspect, paired with how fluidly he would bounce from one enemy to the next, stopped this combat system from ever feeling repetitive. That's absent in the Dark Knight Rises mobile game. Yes, the very basic makings of free flow combat are here. The way you magnetize the enemies from meters away, how easily you can bounce from enemy to enemy, and even the ability to counter attacks. Those are what I consider to be the main 3 ingredients of free flow combat, and they are here. But it lacks that rhythmic feeling you get from the real thing. Batman feels sluggish, clunky, and there's an overuse of slow-mo that severely impacts the pace of combat. These brief instances of slow-mo can also be found in the Arkham games, but that game's combat flows so well and feels so fast that the moments of slow-mo didn't hold the pace back, and instead made landing those kicks and punches feel really impactful. Here, not only do fights drag out because of Batman's clunkier feel and constant slow-mo, but enemies also feel like damage sponges. These guys can take quite the beating. I'm not wearing hockey pads? Shit, you should be wearing hockey pads, Bats. Those things are more resilient than you think. Batman also has just a few animations that he cycles through, contributing to that repetitive nature of combat here. We'll get more into how gadgets work in a bit, but in regards to how they work in conjunction with combat, they sort of do. Like, you can stop punching guys to take a second to throw a batarang at someone or throw down a smoke pellet, but gadgets are not seamlessly married to free-flow combat like how they are in the Arkham games. Like how you could quickly throw a batarang at a guy or use the backclaw to yank a guy towards you without missing a beat. But here, they are very much 2 separate systems. Now, with all that being said, the combat mechanics in The Dark Knight Rises, they still get the job done. Yeah, it's a much lesser version of its Rocksteady counterpart, but let's be real, there was no shot a mobile game would measure up to even The Amazing Spider-Man. But as an on-the-go experience, it's pretty novel that for all intents and purposes, it does the thing, despite its lack of polish, which is something that can be said for most systems in this game. Being a creature of the night, stealth is also a viable option for taking out Gotham scum. You can inch up behind enemies for a stealth takedown or swoop down from above. I was pleasantly surprised by how often I was presented with the option to face enemies head on or take my time and take them out one by one. Prepare for me to say this a lot, but not unlike the Arkham games, it is advisable to take out enemies that are armed to the teeth first to avoid ending up like Mr. and Mrs. Wayne. Stealth works most of the time. What makes the stealth mechanics wonky is that the enemy AI is completely shot. Either the enemy's peripheral vision is totally absent, or they'll be able to spot you from 2 city blocks away and 360 no-scope you. Way to age myself by saying 360 no-scope. Much like how I feel about the combat mechanics, even though the stealth mechanics leave a lot to be desired, they do enough to get by and still offer variety when approaching a group of enemies. Of course, no Batman game is complete without a deep pocket of nifty gadgets to dig into, and The Dark Knight Rises offers a fair bit to play around with. You have your standard batarang to take out enemies from a distance with, an electricity-infused one to take out turrets and stun enemies with, a smoke pellet for those quick getaways, a flashbang grenade for those surprise birthday parties, and a grapnel gun to do your best Scorpion impression with. There's a good variety here to aid your combat and stealth needs with, but you're gonna want to sit down for this one. Gadgets in the 2012 Dark Knight Rises mobile game are pay to win.
What?
I truly can't believe I'm saying this about a Batman movie tie-in mobile game. That's single player. But here we are. You have a limited supply of each gadget in your inventory. You can find stashes of them throughout the open world, just laying around rooftops, alleyways, or Wayne Tech loot boxes. But you can also just straight up buy packs of them using Wayne bucks, as well as upgrade them and Batman himself by buying skill points. Now, the APK file I downloaded started me with a whopping 7 million Wayne bucks, so the stock exchange crash didn't have much an effect on Brucey here as it did in the movie. But I told myself that I want to experience this game in a way that wouldn't give in to the predatory practices of the gaming industry. That I would gather resources by just playing the game itself and not reaching into my hypothetical wallet. for about 20 minutes, then I completely maxed out my gadgets, costume, and stats because I've got money, bitches! Yeah, so I can't really tell you how generous the game is with giving you experience to level up your gadgets and Batman with, or how frequently you come across batarangs and other gadgets. What I can say is that the open world here is very much designed for grinding side missions to gather XP and Wayne bucks with. But hey, you got a full-on open Gotham City for you to explore by zipping around with your grapnel gun and gliding around with your cape. The city's design is about as memorable and sauceless as it is in the movie, but again, it's novel to have a big open city in your phone. I mean, at the time, now we have frickin' Death Stranding at our fingertips. Technology is advancing way too fast. Of course, traversing the city is not as well realized as it is in Arkham City. You can't do that stomach-turning dive bomb and swoop up at the last possible second to build up momentum, and you can't propel yourself forward by launching off the tail end of a grapnel gun zip. But to make up for that, there are these air vents on rooftops that'll boost you up when you glide over them, giving you more airtime. And for what it's worth, I thought the gliding controls were pretty good. I was able to land where I intended to most of the time to set myself up for a stealth takedown behind an enemy. The grapnel gun also has its fair bit of jank. It has a targeting reticle letting you know when a building is in reach, but a lot of times I felt that the reticle wasn't locking onto buildings that were clearly in reach for me to zip to, and it hampered the pace of traversal as I stumbled around waiting for that reticle to pop up. There are a handful of things to do here in Gotham City, like gathering collectibles in the form of blueprints and that little chalk bat symbol drawing from the movie. There's also the aforementioned side missions, and they have a decent variety of objectives. There's one that'll have you simply take out a group of Bane's mercs, one that has you destroying stockpiles of ammunitions or vehicles, another that has you rescuing hostages. Getting spotted will result in Bane's thugs shooting at hostages, thus affecting your mission rating. There are also these bomb defuse missions that I thought were really cool because if you're able to get to the bomb without alerting the guards, then all you have to do is simply interact with it for a few seconds to defuse it. But if a guard spots you, they'll run over to the bomb and activate it, giving you a time limit, and in order to defuse it now, you'll have to do this Bioshock style pipes puzzle. The best thing I can say about these side missions is that they do a really good job of gamifying the plot point of Bane and his mercenaries taking over Gotham. It feels natural the way this game has Gordon dispatching you to several events happening around Gotham to neutralize Bane's control over the city and bringing hope to its citizens. But cycling through these handful of side missions for more than a few hours will quickly become repetitive, and the pay to win, or I guess more accurately, pay to avoid getting nauseatingly bored and impatient with this game's combat nature starts to rear its ugly head. Because you'll inevitably chuck a batarang at someone's head and realize that it is the most OP, broken, and undoubtedly most effective way to approach any given scenario. Fully upgraded batarangs will straight up one-shot every enemy that's not a boss, but not only do they pack one hell of a punch, but the targeting system is very generous. It can be an enemy right up in your face, one from tens of meters away, or a group of enemies charging at you. All you have to do is tap the batarang button, and all your problems will disappear at the blink of an eye. It quite actually makes every other form of attack in the game obsolete. These things were like drugs. I couldn't fight the urge to just use batarangs. Now, again, I can't speak to how tempted someone would be to spend actual money on a pack of digital batarangs, but if grinding for these things would take as long as I imagine, then it's no wonder they took the opportunity to offer them as microtransactions. Which is such a massive shame because this decision leaves a sour taste in my mouth. After playing what I would otherwise consider a commendable attempt at giving us an on-the-go Arkham clone. There's no reason to offer in-game resources as microtransactions in a single-player game that you already paid for. I feel a little silly crying about it today because obviously the game has long been delisted and emulating it will give you access to unlimited currency and skill points, but this decision paints the rest of the experience, because now the painfully slow pace of melee combat and how overpowered batarangs are seems very much intentional, and that's just super scummy. The game still shines when you're playing linear indoor levels. They're paced fairly well with story beats, consistent dialogue, and even though they don't have the openness and scale found in the Gotham City map, they still offer the player plenty of options with how to approach combat encounters. when you're ignoring the batarangs. It makes me wish that this game would maybe ditch the open world and instead focus on giving us a more refined and self-contained set of levels that incorporate all of Batman's gadgets more cleverly. And tracking down those gadgets tucked away in nooks and crannies off the beaten path would make for meaningful and rewarding exploration, whereas taking the time to find them in the open world just feels like busy work. Alright, let's catch up with the story. Now, I don't want to just recap the story from beginning to end, but I do want to highlight how this game goes about adapting the major plot beats from the movie. Because that's what had me so dumbfounded about this mobile game adaptation, that for the most part, it accurately adapts every major story beat. I've seen The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises a bunch of times, and every time I watch them, it makes more and more sense to me why the universe never gave us video game adaptations of those movies. Well, at least not mainstream console adaptations. They're just too slow and so dialogue and plot heavy that I imagine game developers would struggle translating those movies into video games. Even Batman Begins had some trouble with this. All of the sequences it adapts from the movie are comically stretched out so it can make for an effective playable level. But that just wasn't an issue in the Dark Knight Rises mobile game. It kinda gracefully pulls it off. And some of the elements from the movie that it decides to extend and take some liberties with are friggin' awesome. But it's also smart about truncating certain plot threads that wouldn't really work the way they do in the movie. One of my biggest questions was, what are they gonna do with Bane breaking Bruce's back? That's like the major plot beat that has massive consequences for the character we're playing as in this game. Are they gonna skip it? Maybe change it up a bit so that Bruce doesn't get his back broken, but instead just really beat up, but not so badly that it doesn't take long for him to recover? Well, let's find out. We get our first look at Bane in the stock market attack, and I'm not exactly sure why, but there's something about this Bane model that didn't immediately register as the character for me. The costume design is almost there. Like, yeah, that's undeniably Bane, but the minor inaccuracies of his wardrobe, like how he's just wearing a tank top instead of that armored vest thing he wears in the movie, made me think that this is an elite Bane henchman instead of the head honcho himself. But the biggest discrepancy is that the guy doesn't do the voice.
Do you know where you are? This hell was once my home.
The modulator is there, and it's kind of accurate. I want to say it barely gets by, but the accent is completely absent. My guess is that the VO for this game was recorded before the decision to have Tom Hardy dub over his lines, where he has that heavier accent. But despite Michael Los not being credited in anything else besides a nondescript role in Pokemon, I still think he does a good job of making Bane sound menacing. And the rest of the cast does a good job impersonating their film counterparts. After taking out Bane's thugs and saving the hostages, we get to drive the Batpod, once again adapting another major sequence in the movie. And driving the Batpod is not the clunkiest thing I've ever experienced. I'll say this, when driving the Batpod in a Batman mobile game feels better and faster than the Batcycles in Gotham Knights, you should take that as a win. We chase Bane into the subway, and after getting through his forces, we prepare for one of the few boss fights in this game. The boss fight here is mechanically starved. There's really not much to do except mash the punch button. They even take away the ability to counter attacks, which would have been pretty much the only way to have some sort of engaging element here. The only thing it really offers is giving the player some sort of interactive element in between these animations that play after you land a few hits. I don't think there's even a way to fail this level unless you just stand there and do nothing. After getting through the boss fight, the game treats you to these black and white illustrations that go pretty damn hard. They set the grim tone of Batman getting his ass absolutely handed to him perfectly. The artist knocked it out of the park. Any of these would make for awesome wallpapers. But this is also how they'll probably gloss over Bruce's time in the Lazarus Pit as he recovers from his injuries, because there's no way that they'll actually— Wait a minute, holy shit, you get to play this section of the movie? Complete with a raggedy Christian Bale character model? See, this is the type of delicious stuff I love from movie tie-in games. There's an entire level that extends Bruce's time in the Lazarus Pit that has him fighting more of Bane's mercenaries, throwing pebbles at switches on a wall to open a door, sneaking through some Ewok village looking place. I don't know. The only thing it was missing was a workout montage that presented the player with QTEs to successfully do push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups like this was a goddamn Rocky game. But it does make up for it by having QTEs as Bruce climbs his way out of the pit. And well, you know I cannot fail it at least once. Oh yeah, that's the good stuff. To mention another area that surprised me is here. You can go to an accurate depiction of the Batcave. Huh, I wonder if that pillar is missing the chunk that Bruce kicked off it with his leg strap thing. Maybe not so accurate. Here you can load up some combat scenarios to grind some Wayne bucks, but besides that, there's not much else to do here. Here's another plot beat I was really curious about. The court scene. The Nolan movies had what felt like an ongoing gag of bringing back Scarecrow for minor roles, and when this game mentioned that someone is running tribunals for Bane, I wondered if this game was bold enough to include Scarecrow. And wouldn't you know it, here he is, with a pretty damn good Cillian Murphy model. You come face to face with Jonathan Crane, something that Batman didn't get to do in the movie. So I say this is a pretty awesome departure. Not only that, but they extend this plot beat from the movie into a multi-level segment that has you chase down Crane to stop him from detonating fear toxin in the Gotham Stadium. This is way more than I expected from this game. The last hour or so of the game gets really repetitive though. It's time to make the final push against Bane's strongholds, so Blake and Gordon rally up the cops to team up with Batman. But the cops refuse, believing the Dark Knight to be Harvey's murderer. This is where Gordon reveals to them that he's been lying to the people of Gotham, falsely making Batman responsible for all of Harvey's wrongdoings, in order to preserve the image of the White Knight. It's not as dramatic and foreboding as it is in the movie, but I think it's a nice way to again, gamify this plot beat, because it naturally leads to a string of missions that has Batman track down Bane's captains with the support of the Gotham police force. Now, what makes this section of the game feel repetitive and kinda lazy is that it just repurposes side missions that you've already been used to doing since the beginning of the game into main story missions. This was kind of a shock to me because all of the story missions that came before were unique and pretty well crafted levels that completely stood apart from the optional stuff. So pulling this now for the last bit of the game feels like blatant padding. But it would be very remiss of me if I didn't mention the mission that lets you pilot the Bat. This game truly has it all. Including the Bat in here is awesome, and I'm not gonna pretend it's not, but this hideous thing lacks any sense of weight and momentum. It feels like I'm just dragging an acid around a 3D space without any proper physics. In this mission, you take out Tumbler prototypes Bane hijacks from Wayne's armory, and I gotta say, props for modeling the desert camouflage version of the Tumbler just for this mission. Alright, it's time for the final showdown. Oh, actually, hold on a second. I mentioned earlier that this game has a few boss fights. Obviously, one of the other boss fights would be the final battle against Bane, but there's also this one. Barsad? He just looked like another run-of-the-mill Bane mercenary, and I wondered why he's named. Well, he's this guy. You remember him? Yeah, there he is. He was a guy. Barsad, everyone. The final Bane boss fight has some things going for it this time around. You can actually counter his attacks this time. I'm surprised the world's greatest detective couldn't figure that one out during his first encounter with Bane, but I guess character development. And at certain points you'll be met with a QTE for extra damage and a cool little animation. Now, this is absolutely bonkers. The ending of this game is completely different from the movie. First off, we murder Bane. Batman stops Bane from even activating the bomb set to wipe out Gotham, so there's no grand sacrifice in the Bat, which means no Bruce faking his death to then go on to retire, and no passing on the mantle to Blake. Bruce just continues to be Batman. Why? Everything before was pretty much in line with the movie, and this is the only thing that's radically different. Did the studio get a version of the script that didn't have the entire ending for the sake of avoiding leaks? Did they change it in hopes of one day developing a sequel to this game? Or did they feel the need to contextualize why you're still able to free roam after you roll credits? I mean, it's a bit excessive. If anyone that wrote for this game happens to watch this video, I would love to hear why the story took this departure. Don't get me wrong, I love this. This is the kind of weird and obscure nerdy tidbits I live for. It's like the alternate ending in the Revenge of the Sith tie-in game where Anakin kills Obi-Wan and Sidious. But here, it's not a bonus Easter egg thing, it's the ending. The Dark Knight Rises mobile game is one that's held back by its greater ambitions of being an open world experience that was perhaps motivated by the contemporary mainline Batman game of the time, Arkham City. I think that had it focused on having a linear or more structured format like Arkham Asylum, or even the Batman Begins game, it would have fared better. As it stands, the open world stuff feels like padding, and like it's there to act as an alternative to the biggest problem of this game, the microtransactions element. Yeah, you don't have to pay for these packs of gadgets and skill points, instead just grind these side missions until you're nauseated. This is such a huge hindrance to this game's pacing. Now, again, it's a little silly to complain about these things when it's impossible to spend money on this game today, but this fault can still be felt in the game's design when the most effective way to beat enemies requires just a single button press, and every other mechanic becomes obsolete. I'd love for someone to come up with the perfect balanced build for Batman in this game, one that gives you just enough batarangs that you have to ration throughout the entire playthrough and not just solely rely on them, so you can make use of combat, stealth, and your other gadgets. I would do this myself, but frankly I'm too lazy, and besides, it's time for me to move on to the next highly requested Game Loft titles, the Amazing Spider-Man games. That's right, so make sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell, and maybe join my YouTube membership to get early access to that video once it's done. Special thanks to Carlos and Sam for subscribing at the top tier. You guys are certified superheroes. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.